So this is our first episode of Amplifying the Arts, Amp Up Arts webinar. And today with us, we have Chris Carter and Dwayne Craft, both from Huntsville. This month, we're going to be talking about connections in arts through schools, organizations, and artists. So these two guys are going to talk to us about the connections that they have in Huntsville City Schools. And I'm going to give them a quick minute to tell us a little bit about themselves. So Chris, if you could go ahead and get us started.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. Hi, guys. My name's Chris Carter. I'm the production manager and programs administrator for Arts Huntsville, and I currently serve as the site director for our Amp Up Arts Collective Impact Initiative. My background includes about 15 years in public education. I was the artistic director for theater at Huntsville City Schools and the Magnet program at Lee High School. And I also adjunct as an instructor of theater at A&M University and UAH. I'm a fight choreographer locally and a proud husband and father of two.
Thanks,
my name is Dwayne Craft. I'm the fine arts coordinator for Huntsville City Schools. Prior to that, for 29 years, I taught theater at Bob Jones High School. I got my master's degree in theater from Florida State University, go Noles, and my master's degree in school administration and leadership from University of Alabama in Birmingham. I'm really glad to be here. Hope I can answer some questions.
Thanks. Thank you, Dwayne. And then I guess I should introduce myself too. I'm Ashley Lucier, the executive director of Amp Up Arts. And one of the things that we do is support local collaborative sites like Creative Launchpad, that Chris is the collaborative site director of, and support the partnerships that are going on in the schools and in the communities that we work in. So that's what I kind of want to talk about first is collaborations and partnerships, because that's such a big part of the work we do. And that's a big part of the work that so many people that we work with also do. So both of you first, can you guys share just an example of a successful collaboration that you've been a part of? So maybe either both of you together or a different one that expanded an arts education opportunity in schools, and kind of what made that successful. So this is for both of you. So however you want to do it.
Chris, you want to talk about AOM or?
Yeah, sure. I'll happily start and then I'll let you fill in. Sure. So one of our most impactful collaborations that we've been a part of with Huntsville City Schools is this initiative called the Arts on the Move program. I get to work closely with local artists and organizations, and we bring in for 9 weeks either a dance or theater teaching artist within a PE class, and the teacher simultaneously teaches both subjects and their learning standards together. I think our success really stems from a shared vision that was crafted by my predecessor, Karen Anderson and Carrie Noel Humphrey. And they had some clear communication with the needs of the school system, and it requires active involvement from the PE educator and our teaching artists. We meet regularly through feedback sessions in order to get whatever we need to do to improve that particular structure and curriculum. And right now it's going strong in 12 of our schools around the district and surrounding systems.
Yeah. One of the beautiful things about what Chris has helped create and what we've been carrying on with Art of the Move is that there's a marriage between the existing course of study guidelines, the standards that have to be met in PE, and then we're managed to integrate the art standards in such a way where those objectives meet. And it definitely opened the door to bring this program into the classroom when we're able to approach these PE teachers and say, not only do you get to learn some new techniques for teaching your standards, but we get to marry that with some basic arts instruction too. Performing arts instruction, is so multifaceted. To get even a little bit in it, and I think one of one of the big things about this particular partnership and thing that we're working on is that it's in the early grades. So when I first started with Huntsville City Schools in this role, 3 years ago, they had not previously had a fine arts coordinator. So I've been kind of able to chart my own path. And one of the things I realized early on was the missing piece for really growing our arts programs was early exposure. When I did my comprehensive needs assessment for what does Huntsville City need to really make the arts vibrant and strong in the schools, I realized that our students were getting, twice a month, maybe, instruction in music and art in the K-5 grades. Well, when Kieran, Chris's predecessor, approached me with the idea behind Art on the Move, I thought, well, here's a perfect way to start exposing students to what the arts are. And, for us, we exist in an ecosystem where we've got certain requirements that are put upon us by the Department of Justice because we operate under a consent decree. And one of those is that we maintain a fine arts magnet program at both our Academy for Arts and Academics and at Lee High School. Well, my thought process was this is perfect because those students that we want applying to AAA, is what we call Academy for Arts and Academics, may not have ever had a dance class and may not have ever been exposed to theater. So, Chris's objective of growing the arts in our community pairs nicely with my objective of exposing students at an early age to the arts so that they know that they want to be a part of that later on. I think that's a critical component with these type of partnerships is kind of targeting what are your strategic goals for both your organizations.
Yeah, yeah. That's great. And I've actually seen Arts on the Move in action a couple of times in the schools in the area, at MLK and
Owens Crossroads.
Yes, Owens Crossroads. It's for me, it's really great for the kids to see the kids so engaged in it. I've just always really enjoyed being able to do site visits for Arts on the Move. So
Awesome.
I think it's a great program that y'all have going. Dwayne, you're really talking about the importance of being able to connect those shared goals between a private organization coming in and then the public, kind of school atmosphere. So what advice would you give to educators or community organizations that want to build partnerships with school districts in a similar way?
Oh, that's a loaded question because every organization and every community is different. 30% of Alabama schools don't have any kind of regular arts teaching going on, which is part of the reason that Amp Up Arts is important, part of the reason that Arts Huntsville is important. So I think you have to start from a position where you clearly define your roles. For me, I work in the curriculum and instruction wing of central office leadership. And so one of the things that I'm charged with is a consistent review and assessment of what our curriculum looks like. Mm-hmm. So, moving into this partnership, it's kind of my job to make some critical decisions strategically about what do I want this curriculum to look like, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, and then communicate that to the organization that I want to partner with. So, Chris's objectives and my objectives align. So, but our, by necessity, some of our responsibilities are slightly different. So I think the first thing is really communicating what are our respective roles. Mm-hmm. In my role, I'm on the curriculum side. Chris can speak to his role, but I think once you have your lanes chosen and you know where you're going to drive in that lane, it allows you to get that convoy moving a little bit quick. That's a tortured metaphor, but either way, I'm trying to think of it's kind of like I had a professor in grad school that said, it's not about getting everybody on the bus. It's about getting everybody on the right seat on the bus before you start heading to school. Yeah. And so I think that was one of the early conversations that we had was what are our respective roles? When Chris' predecessor was there, she was a former teacher, so she understood, some of the curricular requirements. We have our course of study, we have our scope and sequence, but how we interpret that really is kind of where my job comes into play. But what Chris is bringing to the table is an enormous amount of resources that I can marry those curricular goals to. And we'll talk probably, I read some of the questions that you gave us as thought provokers, and I do want to talk about how some of those marriages happen at a depth that really sells the partnership to leadership above the LEAs that have fine arts coordinators. But yeah, I think number one is finding your lane and deciding what your respective roles are. And then I think the second part of that is consistently communicating. This year, Chris and I have started meeting once a month. And, next month's meeting, we may not have a whole lot to talk about. It may just be us hang out for a minute, but we're going to meet because that kind of communication is vital to really keeping the partnership strong and growing.
Yeah.
Chris,
If I was gonna give you advice, that's what I would say is, for me, building relationships is what's crucial, right? You have to get out and connect with your educators, connect with the administrators, and establish a trust and a collaborative process. So once we know what the priorities are for Mr. Craft and the district, we hear the challenges, we try to create proposals that align with those goals, and then go out and seek the solution. And then I go back in touch with them and say, okay, here's what we discovered,
And they're really good at finding solutions. And I mean, I want to pause and say that, the partnership with Arts Huntsville, they have brought so much to the table in terms of just thinking differently about how we can approach some of the challenges. And so I would say a second part of that is you really kind of have to park your ego. It's really easy for some people in leadership positions to kind of put on their blinders and say, well, I'm in charge of this. But, you kind of have to park your ego a little bit and look at your partner and think clearly about, these are the things they're doing that I can't do, or that I'm not certain about how to approach this. And they have more experience. So I think that's another part of it, is there's got to be a mutual respect. There are things that Chris knows how to do that I wouldn't even begin to try. We have 43 schools in our system. We serve over 25,000 students. So, that some of the aspects of my job are so different from what Chris does that, he may not really get, hey, we can't do that. But there's enough mutual respect and enough respect for each other's abilities that, as far as a partnership goes, it's a give and take. And I think that Arts Huntsville really does a beautiful job of, helping me see the things that they're super strong in that I might otherwise miss. And so I think that's really another important aspect of it.
I think we've done a pretty good job, to use the yes and theater metaphor of also like, oh, well, we can't do this, but and there's always an ellipses to solve a problem in another way, right? So the door's never been closed. There's always an opportunity to advance forward, and I think that's also one of the keys that we've got going on for us here. It's really nice.
Yeah, I think sometimes in the kind of arts world versus education world, the language is very different. And to have that communication that y'all are talking about is so important, because, Dwayne, just like you were saying, there are things that Chris is not going to have to deal with. And then there are things that Chris has to deal with that you don't have to deal with. But having some kind of understanding of each other's language in their fields, works, but also understanding that we're not going to completely understand every part of that language either. So I think that's a really good point to make, is finding those things that each of us can bring to the table, and then respecting them and lifting them up. I was in a meeting with another collective impact model from a different state, and they always used to phrase it like, we're completing, not competing. We're working in partnerships. And they would say that all the time, that we're completing each other. We're filling in those gaps, not only in the schools, but also in like what we can do versus what the school can do. Because there's a lot that Dwayne can go into schools and do that a nonprofit can't necessarily do, but nonprofits have a lot of freedom to do things in ways that schools can't do as well. So it is, like you said, it's a very nice marriage of that. And even though it's really great, those partnerships are really great, but we did talk about, these are these key things that you kind of have to make sure are happening. But Chris, from a nonprofit organization's perspective, sometimes there's a lot of challenges working with organizations that don't have the freedom that we have to do things, right? So kind of what are some of those challenges sometimes that you guys may have experienced with public schools, and how did you kind of work through them, or, partner with Dwayne to work through them?
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. We never have any problems up here in Huntsville. No, actually, the thing that comes to mind, honestly, is just navigating the different schedules. We try to serve like 15, 20 schools, and each one of them is individual and unique. Teachers and administrators are often pulled on 100 ways with a billion demands on their time, and it's an extreme. Like every day, it's which fire can I point my hose at today? So what we try to do to overcome that being our largest issue is just work to establish open lines of communication early. You're right. We start talking about what we want to do the following school year. Even right now in January, February, we're having meetings about how to accommodate what they need for next year. Adapting timelines is very important to meet the individual needs of the school's calendar. And then flexibility, sometimes while we're trying to match students and arts experiences, and there's a production coming in, the calendar just doesn't line up. And then the struggle is, okay, well, how can we accommodate that in the future? So we're always trying to look for those things. And then I'll tell you, one of the best pieces of advice I've received recently was from a site partner that is listening on this call right now. And she said, send emails between 7:15 and 7:30 a.m. if you want to get them read, because that's when everybody's at Carline, hanging out, getting ready to start the day, and you pop up, because once the day starts and is, just how can you keep your head above water? And so sometimes when I get stuck with just communication barriers, Mr. Craft really does help me bridge the gap, and he has the ability to say, hey, let's circle back to this together, and then I can go in and maybe help you. Because it's not that everybody is on the team. It's just sometimes if you're not right directly there in front of them, you're not the biggest problem of the day. So that's what I imagine is probably my greatest challenge.
Yeah, the competing priorities, I mean, from my background in education, the competing priorities are really tough to handle and to manage. And, you don't want to feel like one more thing in a school. But I said, you guys are coming in early, figuring out your strategic goals, and that really makes everything flow so much easier.
Yes.
And
you really have to
and the
begin with like a 6-month.
Can I chime in on that? Because I think, one of the things that I realized early on working with Chris was that sometimes just getting the principals to communicate back to, these things that we're offering is a challenge sometimes, because like Chris said, they're drinking from a fire hose. It's constantly in your face. I think one of the things that Chris and I have really kind of discovered, and this is kind of a push for me right now, is the concept of arts integration. So, principals and schools in Alabama are not graded on how pretty the performance is on Saturday night. Our school report cards are reflected by literacy and numeracy scores. Mm-hmm. So I think that what Chris and I have kind of worked on together is, how do we communicate to these principals that what we're doing is going to enhance what they're achieving in terms of literacy and numeracy? Because that's your wedge to get in the door. So, when Chris approaches me with an idea, let's try this. The first thing I do when I go in to speak to that principal, and oftentimes I'll be the first point of contact and kind of wedge the door open so that Chris can come in after me, is I will approach him and say, look, what we're doing in the arts is going to enhance what you're doing on these test scores. I guarantee that you'll see some movement, on the test score needle if we execute this correctly. And I think that one of the things that happens is principals hear the arts, and they think, okay, this is pretty pictures and dance and everything else. But what they don't see is the volumes of research that show, if properly implemented, that arts integration can truly, truly raise academics. Chris's organization's worked with a group called Mind Pop out of Austin, Texas, and they've really kind of modeled this is what happens when you do it right. So one of the things that I try to train principals, quote unquote, I try to educate them on is we're not in it to do just arts enhancement. You know, if they're teaching about Abraham Lincoln and then Fantasy Playhouse puts on a play about Abraham Lincoln, that's enhancement. But if the theater teacher is teaching about stage directions and the math teacher is teaching coordinate plane, those two are shared objectives that we can marry. And as a result, both things get strengthened. So I'll give you an example. Right now, I'm working with 3 second grade teams, regular classroom teams, and working through the Arts Integration Accelerator to train them with arts integration. And they're selecting 2 math standards. Well, Chris's organization is also coming in with some of our schools and choosing champions, I believe is what you called them, Chris. And they're supporting training these teachers, regular classroom teachers, to see the value in arts integration. So I think it's finding the right keys to the door and recognizing what the system and the principals are feeling pressured to achieve, and then showing them how what collaboratively Arts Huntsville and Fine Arts in Huntsville City Schools can achieve towards the systemic goals and the local school goals. So, you know, you said something really interesting, complimenting Ashley. Up here, I like to say supplementing, not supplanting. But we're in a system that's very fortunate. You know, they created a fine arts coordinator position. Not everybody has that. And like I said, 30% of schools in Alabama have no formalized arts instruction. So I think in those instances, it's not just supplemented, it's providing. Now we want to encourage those school systems to build a fine arts program, but they don't see, it's kind of like with the K2 effort and getting them to see the value in it so they'll engage with it. I think organizations like Amp Up Arts are really good about showing these administrators, hey, if you had a fine arts program, here's how good it could be and how much of an impact it could have. So I think that's the kind of line that that outside organizations and then public organizations like a school system have to kind of, it's a tightrope that we have to walk. But I think my role in relationship to what Chris wants to accomplish is kind of like a fixer. I make introductions, I talk up the organization, I open the door so Chris can come in and say, hey, this is what we want to provide you. And I've already talked to the principals about the value of it. So between the two of us, we get those nuts and bolts going, but we've already opened the door. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, he's like 98% of the time, now that we've had a touch, the principal will allow me to have a meeting and then realize that I'm not just some snake oil salesman coming in trying to scam them, you know, $100. Like, oh no, this is a legitimate thing, right? That's very useful. Otherwise, they're bombarded with people all the time trying to break through the barrier. So having those relationships established is very useful. And once we are there with Arts on the Move and start building relationships with the PE teachers, that allows us to branch out and start talking to other educators in the building as well. That's when we bring on our creative champion process and also start doing some arts partnership support. So it's really nice to have him there to say, yeah, trust this one. He's legit. So,
and then you also, another aspect of this partnership is I could be a conduit from Chris to the superintendent or the deputy superintendent, or to the directors of instruction, because oftentimes they're so focused on, you know, the big picture goals of the system that, you know, I can slot in. This is, hey, you need to look at what Arts Huntsville's doing because they're really bringing some value and they're helping us in that core mission. So, you know, that kind of interface, I think having that kind of liaison, even to levels of leadership, you know, above my level, I think is another place where that partnership really sings. Now, I think that one of the difficulties is once you've made those connections, I think that the fine arts coordinator has to trust the organization to do their thing and back off and let them have that relationship. You know, as a fine arts coordinator, I deal with so many different aspects of the fine arts, whether it's the mechanics of itinerant elementary specials, or you know, what do our bands look like? You know, so when I back off and leave Chris to do what he's done once I've opened the door, I trust implicitly and 100% that their impact is going to be positive. So I think we talk about communication, but there has to be a level of trust where I know that Chris and Arts Huntsville have the very best intentions and goals for our students. Because, you know, as an educator, Chris knows this, he was a teacher, our first and foremost charge is to do the best for our students. So, and I trust Chris 1,000,000% would do the best for our students.
And that's so important, even at the state level that we are as a collective impact model. It's so much of it is relationships and trust building, and trusting the people that you work with, trusting your sites to do what's right for their communities, trusting other state partners. So that's, I mean, that's so critical to, like you said, forming that relationship, but also maintaining it, because they can go away so quickly. And, you know, if you have a school with high turnover or something like that, like you've got to really have that strong relationship within the school building to be able to keep maintaining it. So they're very fortunate to have you, Dwayne. Like you said, not every district has an arts coordinator, and that can be really difficult for them, especially if they have a lot of gaps, you know, in their district with arts. And so when we're talking about like going into the schools and, you know, presenting this as a value for them, I'm assuming that you've probably already looked kind of into the school, maybe some gaps in access that they've had. So for y'all together, kind of what strategies do you use to identify the gaps in arts education access in the school or the community?
I can talk about what we do for a minute, and then Kraft can probably take over, because I know he'll probably have a much larger answer than I will about that. But
are you saying
so
I'm talking too much, Chris?
No, I'm just saying you have tremendous amounts of data that you've got all schools, and I only have a couple. But what we like to do is first talk with the principal. We do a creative campus strategic plan, and take that sort of as our roadmap to how can we help serve that particular school. Also, we will communicate with parents using community surveys and direct feedback from local administrators and educators in order to address whatever the gaps may be, and then see if we can come up with a way to supplement whatever may be missing from the school system. And then we take that idea to Craft and let him work his wizardry.
Yeah.
I don't know about wizardry. I'm a numbers person. One of the things I'm currently working on is paying attention to our course loads for our elementary specials, our itinerants, music and art. And I'll give you an example. Our itinerants operate on a 10-day rotation. So every 10 days, their schedule's based on 10 days. And typically they serve 2 schools. I have a few schools that are 1-to-1, meaning one music, 1 art, and they stay at that school the whole time. But typically our itinerants are 2 schools. And so we base the number of days on on school population. So if you have a large school, you may get 7 of those 10 days with music and art. And then the other school may have a smaller population, you get 3 of the 10 days. Okay. Well, one of the things I've noticed is that I've got 2 teachers that are teaching 52 classes in 10 days. And I've got 2 teachers over here that are teaching 42 classes in 10 days. And so, I may go to Chris and say, all right, I need some help with these teachers. They're doing 52 classes in 10 days. Let's see if we can take some of the load off of them, because the kids aren't really getting the most that they could get. And then another aspect of looking at it is, what's the socioeconomic status of the school itself? So, Huntsville City is a true public school system in that we have Title I schools and we have affluent schools, and there's a mix of everything. My heart and focus tends to be with our Title I schools. I grew up on that end of town, so I feel it for those kids, and they don't have the access that other kids have. A lot of these kids are never going to be able to go to dance school and take dance classes. And so when Chris mentioned Art of the Move, or when we started Art of the Move, or when Chris and Karen started Art of the Move, that was the thing that I jumped at was, let's find those schools where the kids in those classes, they're never going to be able to afford to take a dance lesson. So now they get dance lessons that are tied to their PE courses, which is a really, really beautiful thing. Or I'll give you another example, and this is something that Chris doesn't know I'm about to pull them into, but I'm about to pull them into it. One of our schools, 32% of the population is English as a second language. The vast majority are from South America and Latin America. And so what we did is we started a mariachi band, because I wanted to communicate to those kids, because we only had about 8 to 10% of them, the choir and band, were from that group. So we started a mariachi band to communicate to them. There is a place in the school that the arts will provide you that you can belong to and have pride in. And so when I'm looking at it, I start from a point of greatest need. Where are the kids where they not have the resources to get exposure to the arts? And then where is our system resources stretched to a point where I feel like the impact that Chris's organization can have is going to really give a lot of bang for the buck. But Chris has a broader charge too. His organization's really got to affect the whole ecosystem of the arts in Huntsville. So Chris, I mean, do you want to speak to that a little bit, how the schools relate to that?
In fact, I mean, you segued kind of into my next thought, which is not, a lot of times it's not me directly filling whatever hole we've discovered. It's me using the networking powers that we have in our advocacy experiences to find the right fit. So one of the things that I've been working on is continuing to build our community of local artists and arts organizations, and not only help them flourish in their own professional careers, but also ask for them to contribute to our educational experiences. And so we have people that are willing to be arts educators in their spare time, while they're doing their professional career as well, which is really nice. So plugging people in, and sometimes they're so successful that they end up doing that full time, right? And we have some examples of that here in the city too. Mario Maitland specifically has really taken off and is doing some beautiful things now. And he's been working with us for a long time at Arts Huntsville, even before I was here. So we're super grateful for those kind of relationships. So building that stuff is real important, I think, too, for my position as an arts organization to help and be effective with all of our local school systems.
I'll give you an example of one way that works when he's building that ecosystem. So recently we have a school that is, I don't know if you know about how many units you're allocated, teacher units you're allocated by the state, but you've got an X amount, and then the rest are made up with local units. Well, we had one school that was over on units. They had too many units from what they were allocated, and they couldn't afford at the time to have a visual arts teacher. And truthfully, it was difficult to find someone who wanted to teach full time. So one of the artists that is involved in the local ecosystem actually came on and is working a 19-hour-a-week contract where they spend the first 2 blocks of the day teaching visual arts at one of our schools. And, I said earlier, supplementing, not supplanting. That's not supplanting a position. That's providing an opportunity for us to have arts there that we wouldn't have otherwise. So, I think one of the things that is beautiful about Chris's organization is when they're building this robust arts ecosystem, it provides us with a lot of resources that we can tap. We had a local artist that through a grant, his name's Johnny Moore, is doing a mural at one of our Title I schools. So that's one of the beautiful things about Chris's organization is they're really building a robust ecosystem. Did we lose Ashley?
We might have lost her, but we'll keep going because I've got the next question for you right here in case she's gone, and let her figure it out, I guess. Okay, so here we are. uh, okay, what role does advocacy play in fostering stronger partnerships between public and private organizations? So we're talking about advocacy now for just a moment.
I'm gonna let you start with that one.
Okay. Well, to answer my own question, I think advocacy is very important in raising awareness, right? It's about telling people what are our mutual benefits for having partnerships like this. So both of us go around and tell people how great we are doing and the great returns we're seeing from students, and we're getting buy-in from our local stakeholders. Like you said, now that superintendent, it's like, oh yeah, I love what they're doing there, and that stuff is what translates into greater, broader work. Sharing impact data, creating opportunities for public recognition, right? You called us to the Board of Education meeting, and we got formal recognition by the Board of Education for our collaborative efforts. And I think all of that stuff is what allows us to continue to grow and do what we're doing. So for me, that's what advocacy really looks like, is telling people why we're doing what we're doing and what makes it great, sharing those positive impact stories, and then allowing the opportunity for people to see that showcased specifically in the school.
So, as an add-on to that, I tell the teachers that I serve that visibility is viability. That the more visible we are in what we do, and the more intentional we are in communicating how it impacts the greater mission, that's the best form of advocacy in a school system. I think also dovetailing with your community. So one of the things that we're doing currently, and this goes back to the arts integration piece, is we've actually added some career technical education courses at Lee High School, one of our magnet programs, and they're in audio engineering, media production, and technical theater. Well, the city of Huntsville, the municipality or city, is looking at working on a workforce development piece. And so we would, through Arts Huntsville, have our exposure piece in the K-3 arena, then 4, 5, 6, all the way through high school, have consistent sequential arts training. And then there's potential for the city to add on to that with some workforce development. But I did have a thought about systems where you don't have that kind of investment in the arts, because I recently went down and did a workshop with a group down in Covington County, and they were telling about their situation, that there weren't enough units to provide the kind of arts instruction. I think that for groups like Amp Up Arts and Arts Huntsville and whatever Arts Alliance they have down there, it's super important that those of us in communities that are a little bit more blessed with these kind of relationships make an effort to give some advice and some leadership and some guidance to them. The stronger Covington County is, the stronger Madison County will be. And I think that in the arts, sometimes we start thinking of it as a zero-sum game, and we approach it from a scarcity mindset. Mm-hmm. When I think one of the things that we need to do is really encourage our partners across the state, people that we work with, to start looking at it as possibility mindset. We can address scarcity if we focus on possibility.
Guys, my internet went out for a minute or something, and I got kicked off and came back on, and it sounded like you guys were right in the middle of advocacy strategies and stuff, which is great. So thank you, because that's another part of what we do as a state organization, is a lot of just advocating for what's going on in your local districts. And I'm really glad to hear too about kind of that cross learning between other districts as well, Dwayne, that you talked about going into and helping them. And I think and you may have mentioned this, so I'm sorry if you did when I was out, but that part that you were saying earlier about going to administrators and talking about the value of it, that's such a key part of the advocacy, that the people involved kind of really understand what's going on. So, and I know, Dwayne, you talked about, being a numbers person. And so you kind of talked about like how it connects to STEM and things like that, but is there any other pieces of like data or evidence that you kind of use to advocate?
If you're an
Or
LEA coordinator, I would strongly encourage you to get real good at Power Schools and Unified Insights. Um, Simply because with my second grade push for arts integration, I'm taking their iReady scores for two standards in math from the beginning of the year. And then at the end of this push, I'm going to take those same two standards, look at the iReady scores, and see if we move the needle. Because if we move the needle even 1 point, then, that's a huge lever to go to administration with. And everybody on this podcast right now knows all the research that points towards how the arts improve test scores. I think what happens, and this is just a moment of brutal honesty, I think what happens with some administrators is they say, that's great that EDTA, Educational Theater Association, has all these studies, but I'm a little suspect that EDTA has all these studies saying that theater helps with test scores. So my thing is, I like to use the data that they're going to look at most closely, because it affects them most closely, and use local data to prove it. And you have to be prepared to data mine the data that most directly applies to what's going on in your system. You know, so yeah, look at your proficiency standards, particularly in literacy and numeracy, and then you can disaggregate that data. You can go, and if you're good at Unified Insights, you can pull all the kids that are in music, choir, or band, choir, theater, and visual art, and then you can go pull what are their standardized test scores. And your administrator is going to argue, well, correlation is not causation, but sometimes when it walks like a duck, it's a duck, right? And you kind of have to make that argument. Well, okay, here's another way to look at it. Let's look at the data from this angle. So that's a very long process. So for me, I just hit year 3. It took me 2 years to figure out which way was up. And in my 3-year plan, one of the things that I'm looking at is what data am I going to track, and how am I going to correlate that to involvement in the arts. And so when Chris's organization comes in, they shouldn't have to track that data. That should be my job. They should focus on bringing the artists in and building that ecosystem and doing the supplementing that they're doing. And then for me to turn around and go, okay, I'm going to look at how this impacted test scores, and come back and tell my board members, this is what Arts Huntsville helped us create. Which you were out, but Chris mentioned that one of the things that I did was in my yearly report to the board, my presentation to the board, I included Arts Huntsville in that presentation so that they could be recognized as, it was a third of my presentation is here's our relationship. So if you really want to build it, get your board members to know your local arts organizations, because that is, they'll jump in behind you.
I think like inviting, and like you may have said this in the advocacy piece, even inviting board members to come to the school and see what's going on, like Arts on the Move during PE, or invite them to the student art show that's in their district. I know that's some things that we've done in other areas of the state too, just to really, again, part of building that relationship and showing them the value of what's going on in their schools. Because like you said, a lot of times if they don't hear it in those reports, or they don't hear it at their board meeting, they may not always fully realize what is going on in every school, especially if it's not something that's in their specific district. So yeah. That's great. Chris, did you have anything that you wanted to put into that as well? I'm sorry.
No, you're right. You're dead on. The only other thing I would say is, like, Mr. Craft and I, in another 3 months, are about to have to investigate that data mining experience, because we'll have another year of data from our own arts experiences that we have to sort of go and pull from and see, and then look. And, we all believe yeah, it helps attendance, it reduces behavioral issues. That's pretty compelling. Academic achievement goes up, and you see it once, but like, do you see it again and again? And every time it happens, and we go, oh, I did, it improved a little bit. Then it's like a yes, and then we can go
Yeah.
preach it for the next year. But you're only as good as your like most recent experience. So if you say even to a principal, yeah, 4 years ago this happened, it's not nearly as effective as saying, hey, check out what happened last year. So
Mhm.
that's something
Mhm.
that we'll investigate here in another month or two.
The
And
other
I
thing
know.
that
Oh, go
sorry.
ahead. No,
I
go
wanted to
ahead.
point something out because I think that one of the fallacies or one of the pitfalls is, what if the data doesn't show what you want?
Mhm.
And you have to be prepared for that. You have to
Yeah.
be prepared to say, yeah, we thought this was going to move the needle, but it didn't. So, with being honest with yourself and the organization, you back up and you take an honest look at it and go, okay, we didn't move the needle, so let's redesign what we're doing.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to tweak it here or there. But I think that I used to tell my acting students, constantly risk failure. Um, and with that comes the ability to accept failure. You may have a push that does not work, and principals will know that. You have to own it. You have to say,
Yeah.
well, okay, that didn't have the impact that I thought it would. I'm going to
Mhm.
try something else. And you get more respect from principals and administrators if you're willing to own it when it doesn't work, and then come back and say, I want to try this again, but I'm going to do something different.
Yeah.
So I just, that's something I have to throw out there as a cautionary tale, because I'm really nervous that these 3 second grade teams I'm working with, the data may not pan out. But
Yeah.
I've already told, my boss, Mr. Buckner, that, hey, if it doesn't work, I'm going to come back and try this from a different angle.
Mhm.
So you got to prep your leadership to understand that it's not a magic wand, that
Mhm.
it's a process. And then one last thing with that, Chris said we're going to go back and look at the data. Dr. Sutton, our superintendent, told me something real important early on. I'd been in the system maybe 3 months, and I had all these big dreams. I mean, I thought Arts Huntsville and Huntsville City School would be married at the hip, and we're going to have all these things in our schools. And I had this big grand plan. And Dr. Sutton looked at me and said, Craft, it is a 3-year plan, not a 3-month plan. So I think it's really important that when you build these relationships and these partnerships, that you think strategically and
Mhm.
act tactically.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the things that Chris is really good about, is doing both, thinking strategically, but acting tactically. And frankly, Ashley, I've watched your organization, and I think you guys have a whole lot of skill at thinking strategically and acting tactically. Um, I think that some organizations, some people get so bogged down in the minutia that they're not thinking big picture. It's one of the reasons I appreciate y'all. Particularly as a collective impact organization, your collective impact is greater than you realize, truthfully. And I'm not just saying that because you invited me on the podcast. I'm saying that because I truly believe it. But I that those are some cautionary things, is to think strategically, because 3 years from now the data may be completely different.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you have to act with fidelity to what you actually see in the numbers.
Mhm. And I think that, I mean, really it's like speaking that education language. I mean, when I was a teacher, that was something that you're constantly doing, even on a daily basis. You're reflecting on your lessons, you're reflecting on units, you're changing things the next year if it doesn't work right. And just being able to really look back and be able to reflect on that, I think works really, really nicely. And I was going to say earlier about the data. We actually had kind of one of the success stories from one of our other collaborative sites was they took the data that the school was really focused on, and that was ACAP. That was their ACAP literacy at 3rd grade. So it was especially,
Big one.
especially a big one. But when they were in there and they targeted those students and looked at their growth, the ones that were participating in these literacy focused integrated arts programs, and they saw growth in them, and it wasn't only helpful for them to continue those programs in that district, but also when they were speaking to legislators in that district, because the legislators want to hear those same kinds of numbers, and that actually also led them to partners getting more funding to go into there and to be able to continue doing that work from the legislators' funds that they had, because they were able to, like you said, Dwayne, pull that current data in that was relevant to that school. So that was really important for them to be able to do that at the local level, because like you said, we have tons of great national data on arts education and research, but you really want to hear how it is working in your specific community. And I just had a few more things about kind of building those sustainable solutions like you were talking about, because change in education, in any type of education, is not fast. It takes a long time if you're going to do it effectively. I will say that, there's a lot of, we talked about, like, I know when I was in the education world, it was like putting Band-Aids on stuff sometimes. And a lot of times, especially during COVID, it had to be that way just because of the rush. But now we have that time where we can really look and, figure out, like, how can we do this right, rather than do it quickly. And that's gonna, because you're talking about those kids, like even in Arts on the Move, that are in kindergarten, first, second grade now, but what do we have planned for them strategically to be able to continue the sustainability of what they're doing? So talking about kind of those sustainable long-term relationships, like, what recommendations do you have for that? You talked about strategic planning that you do kind of on a yearly basis, and building relationships and building trust. But what if you're in, let's say, an area that may not have the capacity to be as sustainable? They may not have an arts coordinator. They may not have a lot of funding. They may not have a lot of access to different things. And that's kind of the ones that are the most difficult to keep sustainable. So what kind of key recommendations would y'all have for them to do that?
Ooh, okay. I'm going to frame this actually. I'm going to frame my answer as a conversation I had with a previous principal in Winter Park, Florida. When I was in Florida, I interviewed to teach at Winter Park, and the principal actually asked me this question in my interview. He said, "All right, so you've got a student in your class who doesn't want to do anything and is not turning any assignments, right? So what do you do, right? What do you do with this kid who's just doing nothing?" And then, I mean, ultimately, the answer is just, it's really easy. It sounds crazy, but the sustainable solution is the same answer to how do you motivate an unmotivated student, which is every day you keep trying and never give up. And if you do those two things, right, your heart's in the right place and you just never give up, eventually something is going to change. And that, I think, is the answer I give you for that, is especially if you feel like you're on an island in the middle of nowhere and you don't have anybody else, just find that one student every day, keep trying, never give up. That's what I would probably say to that.
Appreciating those small victories.
Yeah.
Throughout.
Yeah.
Building that sustainability, because I did ask you about these, these very large sustainable like goals, but also, like, we can't forget those little steps.
The first step is one of the hardest. Yeah.
If we only have that kind of pie in the sky vision, we'll forget all those little steps that it takes, like you said, to keep going and to keep it sustainable. Yeah. Dwayne, what do you think?
Well, so sustainability is tied to how much buy-in you get from leadership. So I come at from a slightly different position. When I started teaching at Bob Jones High School, it was not the most desirable school to go to. We had about 700 kids. I once heard it referred to as the armpit of the county system. This is before it became Madison City Schools. But early on, we had a city councilman in Madison right before we changed over to a city system that was he bought into the arts a lot. And he later on became a board member. So, Madison City became a very art-centric school system. I mean, very art-centric.
Yeah.
But it did not happen overnight. It did not happen overnight. It was the old adage about how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. And I think realizing that, for instance, with me, finishing 3 years, I've got a much clearer view of the things I want in place to sustain what we're doing later on. But I may have to back up and make those smaller bites because I tend to run faster than I can see. So I don't know. I'm probably not the best person to ask about that because I've only got 3 years in this position, so I'm still figuring that aspect of it out. I just do know from personal experience that you have to get buy-in from some decision makers to give you some freedom to take those small bites. It, it it makes a lot of difference when you have at least one key advocate in leadership for you. And I think what we're seeing in the state, Hoover City just added a fine arts coordinator, which they're analogous to Madison City as far as size goes. Jeff Coed, they've got 10,000 more students than us, and they've had a fine arts coordinator for a long time. Dr. Brown's doing a great job down there. I think that as far as statewide, I think that you're going to see some growth in terms of LEA fine arts coordinators. It's kind of keeping up with the Joneses a little bit, but if we leverage that correctly, it can help with sustainability across the state. Ashley, I think the hardest part for your job is you have to look at the whole state. I get to look at Huntsville City, Chris gets to look at Huntsville and Huntsville City, Brian down in Hoover gets to look at Hoover, and Dr. Terrence Brown gets to look at Jeff Coed, but you got to look at the whole state. So that's probably a better question for you. How do you create sustainability statewide, Ashley? I mean, how are you going to sustain the impact that Amp Arts has?
I mean, ours is really through the work, we are statewide, and I do have to, be aware of what's going on in all the areas that we work in. But really part of that sustainability is supporting that local work. I mean, that's what keeps us sustainable at the state level to be able to do what we're doing. Because if they're not doing it, then there's nothing, for us to do, for us to support. So, I mean, ours is really about continuously building up those partnerships and networks and supporting their needs, but also respecting that, we can't go in and blanket say that every collaborative site is going to be doing the same thing. I mean, it's not impossible to say that. We don't want to say that. Because like you said, Huntsville City is very different than Covington County, than Montgomery, than Tuscaloosa, than Mobile, and those are other areas that we work in. And to, be able to give them that space to do what they need to do for their community is a much more effective way than, just we're going to come in and we're going to tell everyone what to do the exact same way in all of the same districts. That's not sustainable, because that's going to be, you're going to have issues in this district, or they're not going to have the right access in this one. It's not going to fit with their demographics or, their needs of their schools. So I think just continuously really paying attention to what those needs are and where that access is or needs to be is how we stay sustainable. I don't have I also, I mean, I would say we're a baby organization. I think, we haven't been around a super long time, but we have a lot of really great mentors that have helped create from where we've gotten. We were an initiative of the Alabama State Council on the Arts. We still work extremely closely with them. Like, they're over the whole initiative with us. So being able to have organizations and partners and mentors that already have very sustained presence in the arts is also very helpful. And that allows us to grow while still getting support from a lot of experience, but still being able to grow as a new organization. So I'm also learning it day by day, Dwayne.
I had to throw that back on you.
I would say that it is impossible for us now to do what we do without the support of the Alabama State Council on the Arts, the support of Alabama State Department of Education. Here in Huntsville, we have support and backing from the mayor, all of our city council, the Board of Education, all of our representatives in both the state and the House here in Alabama. So we are super, super lucky to have people that have been receptive to the mission of expanding arts education. And thank goodness we have the tremendous people in our corner supporting us that we do. So I just want to shout all of those guys out for a minute because, man, without that, we would not be where we are.
Speaking of State Department, I need to shout out to Andy Meadows. He's done a really phenomenal job of really helping me, mentoring me, but really advocating. I wanted to point out a couple of things before. I know we're running up on time, but I just some thoughts that I had. One of the things when I first started, we basically had a fine arts summit, and I invited every community band, Huntsville Symphony Orchestra. I invited them all in, any artist, any group. And one of the things I said to them is, what we do in the schools today is going to determine how big your audience is tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So if you want to sell that art piece, you need to have people who appreciate art. Yeah. If you want to sell that concert ticket, you need to have people who understand music. Across the board, reminding the organizations that are private, and not profit and out there, that we're building from the and it may sound arrogant, but from the education standpoint, we're building your audience for you. Mm-hmm. So we need to work hand in glove to make sure that we have an effective route for that. I think that's part of the sustainability piece too. Yeah. If you don't have enough kids coming out of high school with band experience, then you don't have a Huntsville Symphony Orchestra. If you don't have enough coming out of high school with dance experience, you don't have a Huntsville Ballet. If you don't have enough coming out with theater experience, you don't have Theater Huntsville. So that has a big part of the sustainability, is just reminding organizations, hey, you're going to wither on the vine if you don't have, the people coming out. I mentioned someone, I asked them if they played football in high school. They said yes. I said, well, did you play Pop Warner football, which is like Little League football, right? Mm-hmm. He said yes. I said, well, would you have played varsity if you had not played Pop Warner? He said, probably not. Mm-hmm. Well, we've got to build the Pop Warner League. That's what the educators have to do. We got to build the Little League that's going to feed that varsity team. Mm-hmm. Had to use a sports analogy, on an arts podcast. I know it's
only ridiculous. A sports analogy, Pop Warner. Wow.
I know I'm old, Chris.
Is that just for football, or is that
just for football? I'm sorry, I really aged myself at that point.
You're the man.
You young people have no idea.
My younger son is very big into soccer, and his thing is like, he wants to play, he's 9 right now. He wants to play in high school, he wants to play in college, he wants to go beyond that. And it's the same thing. So I was like, I don't know, does that mean he plays popcorn soccer? I don't know if that's what that is. Oh, popcorn. Oh, I thought you said.
Yeah, it used to be I should have never said that. We use a sports analogy with
sports ball here.
Can you cut that part out of the podcast?
I don't know. I don't know if I have those type of art skills, but I think it is important to consider. We think about just workforce. Like, Alabama is so heavy on workforce development, right? Outside of arts, and that's exactly what we talk about all the time in workforce development. It's like, if you don't have students exposed to these things and prepared for them at the school level and have experience with them, they're not going to be able to have those jobs that we want to have. And when we talk about the arts jobs, it's not just, the local people. When you have cities that have a lot of art, that are very arts rich, they tend to have better economies. So, it kind of flows into that whole, strategy, like you said, sustainability that they need. So yeah.
Look at this. Look at the school. Look at the systems that have done it and the cities that have done it. So I'll give you an example. Austin, Texas is very tech heavy. Huntsville's very tech heavy, kind of analogous in size, and they're very arts rich. That's what they're known for. Colorado Springs, same kind of thing. Successful cities that are arts rich part of the component of their success is being arts rich. Now in Huntsville, we built the Orion Amphitheater here not too long ago. We have the Mark C. Smith Concert Hall, Mars Music Hall,
Yeah.
and we're seeing a renaissance here that certainly to be sustainable needs the schools preparing the future audiences and the future artists. So I think that you made a good point that the workforce development piece is we've got to communicate to our leadership the billions of dollars that are brought into the state by arts experiences.
Yeah.
It's not just the Toyota plant down the street. It's also the millions and millions of dollars that the Orion Amphitheater brings into Huntsville, yearly.
Yeah.
So,
And those high quality people, the high quality workers that you want in those positions, that you need in some of those really high tech positions, they want those art experiences to be able, they want that quality of life. So if it's not there, and yeah, maybe there is a car factory there, but if there's nothing for me to do, if there's nothing for me to enrich my quality of life outside of that car factory, what I can find somewhere else with that same job that can give me a better quality of life. So
yeah, true.
yeah. So before we go, I just wanted to ask you guys if you had either one actionable step that you could leave our audience with tonight, or a resource or a tool that they can use to kind of either begin to advocate to strengthen in their local community these programs, or to foster collaboration with their schools.
Sure. So, well, I'll start with the actionable item. If you are an arts organization, it is build a relationship with a school near you, right? Just whatever the thing that you're good at, come up with a way to allow that thing to be present and help students grow academically. So after you've built that relationship, you'll be able to make significant impacts, whether it's after school programs, artists, special visits, so whatever your thing is as an arts organization, go ahead and build a relationship now. And if you're a school, the challenge is the same, but in the opposite. Think about what arts organization you could build a relationship with today, and just pick up the phone or send an email at 7:15 a.m.
So I agree with him, and it is right from their school. I would encourage you to have an art summit. I mean, because it communicates to your local artists and your local arts ecosystem that the door is open to engage with the school system. So organize a summit or an arts event where you intentionally go to every artist you possibly can. And I've got my spreadsheet with every artist I know. They go straight in that spreadsheet. I steal a lot of them from Chris's website.
Yeah, so that'll be our tool in just a minute. Don't worry, we'll come back to it.
But do that spreadsheet and keep on plugging in artists' names. And it doesn't matter if they're doing traditional arts like basket weaving or whatever, or they're doing high-tech graphic design. But invite every one of them into your fold there. So I would say, have a summit with everyone, co-host it if you have a local like Arts Huntsville type organization, and invite them in, and then articulate what you need. Tell them this is where we need some supplementing. This is where we need some help, and also bring something to the table. So, Chris's organization, they're doing Art on the Move. Well, I wanted to add one school, so I found the money within the system to pay to add that one school with the teaching artists. It wasn't easy, but I did find it. But what that does for us is I'm bringing something to the table too. So I think you got to be conscious about a two-way street. You got to know that you're bringing some value to that arts organization too. It's really important that you think in those terms. If Chris asks me tomorrow, can Arts Huntsville host something at one of our facilities, I will make it happen. No questions asked, because that's part of the relationship. So, pull everybody in, some sort of summit, and then communicate to them, doors open, and then be willing to for it to be a two-way street.
So that'll
Awesome.
bring us to tools.
Yes.
And he mentioned, so we have some resources available at Arts Huntsville, but I would go even larger scale for the conversation today, which is Amp Up Arts website has a site probably near you with someone like me close by, and their information and contacts will allow you to get plugged in and get connected. So if you're looking for resources locally, you can talk to any of our site directors with Amp Up Arts, and they will be able to point you in the right direction, because that's what we are here for, is to build bridges to connect people with arts education experiences.
And that's
I would
something
say,
too that
sorry.
that Dwayne was talking about with doing an arts summit. If you are in an area that you don't have an LEA arts coordinator, that's something that, and we are, most of the areas we work in do not have one. So if it is an area like that, that's also something that we can help facilitate our art summits and things of that nature, networking events to get people into your schools, or for the schools to know who is available. Yeah.
I was going to mention Artlook as well. That's one thing that I found useful. Now, its usefulness is going to be determined by engagement from your local artists. They have to put themselves in as teaching artists, or it doesn't work. And we've been pretty fortunate with encouraging people up here to use Artlook. Still not quite where I want it to be, where all of our local artists in there, but I keep working on them. But I think if we can encourage the use of that particular tool, because it's got some data metrics in it that really give you an idea, a snapshot of where you are. If you know who you're partnering with now, you know who you want to partner with in the future. So I think that tool's got a little more maturation that has to happen. But once it does, I think it'd be very useful and generate some good data for you too. Just looking at the snapshot of how much influence you have, and that's on the school side too. I worked on a task force with State Department of Education regarding that, and one of the things we noticed is we're not getting universal implementation or universal responses to Artlook. If we could get there, then we would really get a very clear picture of where we are in the state. So I'm going to kind of push for that. Hopefully in the next 3 to 5 years, that will be a go-to tool. But I really want to encourage people to look at Artlook and try to encourage their local artists to go ahead and jump in there and make a profile, because you don't know, you might have a school comes to you and wants you to do all kinds of things, but if they don't know you're out there, that's kind of I'm looking at, what kind of clearinghouse do we have so that I know who to invite to a summit? Yeah. And so that is a tool that's out there as well. And now I'm going to go steal a bunch of artist names off Ashley's website. So, and put those in my spreadsheet.
Well, and Artlook, if you're not familiar with Artlook, that's a database from the Alabama State Department of Education, and it's managed by the Alabama Arts Alliance. And that is a database of all the public schools in Alabama, and then also, like Dwayne said, artists and organizations, arts organizations can also put profiles in there as well. So schools are able to look up what's available in their area in terms of arts. And then artists and organizations can also look at schools in there and what their needs are as well too. So Artlook Alabama is that one. And yeah, I think I agree with you, Dwayne. As soon as, as it starts growing, it's going to be, I think, a really strong resource to have. So yeah. Awesome. Well, we went a little bit over time. Sorry. I tend to do that anyway. And also probably because my internet cut out and I got a little behind, but I just wanted to thank both of you so much for being on tonight, and for everyone that's listening in. And this is going to be posted most likely on our website, the recording, so you can go back and reference anything that Chris and Dwayne have talked about. If you have any questions about anything or would like to participate in our webinars or anything that we're doing, you can always email me at ashley@ampuparts.org. Other than that, I think we're good, guys. And thank you so much again for coming.
Thanks for having
inviting
us.
us.
Thanks.